So thank you all for coming. When we decide on doing a workshop, we always wonder, who's going to actually come. So it's nice to see some faces in the audience. So and everyone has the handouts, I hope, because we're going to be using that through the talk today. And although throughout we're going to have time for questions at periods of time throughout our workshop today. But if you have any questions, feel free to kind of jump in and ask, because we want it to be as informal as possible. So the title of our talk is Your Next Great Idea, and why and how did Kate and I kind of come to this? So as clinician scientists, we're routinely expected to come to ideas, and these ideas are supposed to be really transformative ideas that are kind of going to shape research and shape the way that we do things. And we wondered, how does that happen? Does it just happen, or like is there something that kind of allows us to come to a great idea? And we thought that it would be a nice addition as a workshop, also because we didn't know how that happened. So we're not at all experts on this. We're not at all experts on the techniques or the processes that we'll be talking about. We're also learning. But we thought we'd present a smorgasbord of kinds of things, and then you guys can kind of take what you will from what we're going to talk about. And I hope that it allows for some conversations, because we'd like to learn from you as much as we'd like you to learn from us.
Awesome. So I guess the first thing to think about is, what does it look like in pop culture when somebody has a great idea? Like, what is that image? When you think about somebody having a great idea, we call it the light bulb moment or the eureka moment. And, I think that there's a story I remember from college about Dmitri Mendeleev, the guy that discovered the periodic table, and how he went to bed one night and he had a dream, and all of the elements in his dream lined up in order. And he woke up and he drew the structure that the elements had lined themselves up in, and it's still the periodic table we use today. And I remember thinking at the time, like, wow, how can I have a dream like that? That's pretty awesome.
But it turns out that there's a whole backdrop to what happened before, that dream. There's, so Graham Wallace, about 100 years ago, had this kind of put forth this process for the creative process. So essentially, there's a preparation stage, there's an incubation stage, there's an illumination stage, and there's a verification stage. And these stages are all kind of the backdrop to that eureka moment. And we're going to go through those through our talk today.
And so when you go back to the Mendeleev story, it turned out that he'd spent 2 years immersed in the chemistry of the periodic table. And he had this underwriting sense that there was some kind of pattern here. And he made himself playing cards, and he would deal out the different elements, and he was looking for patterns. And then one night he went to sleep, so that he had an incubation period, and he had that moment of illumination in a dream. And then he woke up and he figured out whether it actually worked, and it did. But we conceptualize the process of getting a great idea is just that moment of illumination. But you have to, when you take a step back, all of those stories that we hear of people that have had amazing ideas, there's that backdrop of preparation, and there's that, that moment of incubation as well, that you can see this pattern over and over again. So we thought that we would structure our talk based on this quote from David Brooks, who's a New York Times columnist. He said that great creative minds think like artists and work like accountants. So we're going to do 2 parts of the talk. The first part is, how does one think like an artist?
So thinking like an artist is a really interesting thing, because artists, combine ideas in a way that's new or unexpected, and then based on that, something comes from it. So it's non-linear type thinking. So for example, here, I'm not sure who's going to wear that shoe, but it's a sneaker motherboard kind of combination. So taking a motherboard, sneaker, kind of bringing it together into this kind of creative new idea. So non-linear type of creative thinking.
So let's go through the stages of the creative process and talk a little bit more specifically about what can they look like. So I think this preparation phase, it's easiest if you think about it being split into 2 pieces. The first part of preparation is depth. In order to have a new and creative idea that's not been had before, you have to understand what the leading edge of your problem is. You have to understand what is the problem that's not been solved in your field, and you have to understand what other techniques have people used to try to solve that, in order to know whether what you're coming up with, these ideas that you're having, are novel or not.
And then in addition to depth, there's the idea of breadth. So with breadth, you're going to be following your interests kind of slightly outside your area of depth. You're going to be looking for interesting kind of recombinations or combinations, kind of that add on to your depth. And you're going to be really looking for things that might be unexpected. So it's the combination of depth and breadth that kind of bring together this kind of idea of preparation.
So then even more concretely, what does depth mean? It means keeping an eye on what's coming out, right? It means getting the tables of contents of the journals that are relevant to you emailed to you. It means signing up for the RSS feed so that you automatically know what titles have come out in your area. It means setting up PubMed alerts so that you're being emailed things that are interesting you and fall within what you're trying to study. And then it means actually finding the time to read those articles that are relevant. And how do you do that? That's the piece. If people have good ideas on that, that's one I really need to work on. There are some interesting apps out there for mainly in the iOS world or iPad and iPhone world, but where you can log into your university library with a single login and then access all the different journals. So browsing and read are two different apps that you can use for that. There also are people out there, I don't know very many of them, but there are people that are really disciplined about actually writing down a summary of all the articles that they read, like summarizing in one sentence, because it's not even just enough to read the title or to read the article. You have to interact with that article in a way that'll stick in your mind.
And also at the preparation stage in terms of establishing breadth. So different people do this in different ways, but the idea is kind of to fall down rabbit holes. So like you kind of want to take like pockets of multiple information and take a shallow dive to some extent into those. So one things that people can do are listening to podcasts. I mean, podcasts are so abundant. There's podcasts on literally everything. So you can kind of get a snippet of information into multiple different pockets of information. Also reading things outside of your focus. Maybe it's related, maybe it's totally unrelated, but doing that kind of starts to build those connections. So blogs, little kind of research briefs, other things that just kind of build your connections in your brain in a broader way.
And there's actually some evidence to suggest that this is the process by which the most influential new ideas come out. So a while back, I ran into a creativity index where a couple of researchers pulled the most influential articles in several different fields and then compared the citation lists of those articles to much less cited or less influential articles. And they found that the more influential articles actually had much broader citation lists. So they were much more likely to cite, an economics journal or something that was completely outside of the area of interest, because that's what this recombination, that's what this creative kind of merging of things that seem disparate and you bring them together, and that's where great ideas come from. So confession, I'm a little vague on the details of that study because I have no idea where I read it, because I'm not very good at capturing interesting ideas to be able to refer to them later. I spent a long time looking for it. I could not find it anywhere. I have no idea where it came from. So wanted to give you a couple of potential ways to think about capturing interesting ideas. One for people that are a little more analog, one for people that are a little bit more digital. So bullet journaling has kind of caught on in the Pinterest crew as a way of time management and productivity management. I don't want to talk about any of those details because they're not relevant to this point. But two things that I learned from bullet journaling that I thought were really helpful were the idea that you can make an index. Like you save the first couple of pages in your notebook and you actually title the pages as you're going through the notebook, and then write down the page number so that you're like, I saw that there was a presentation that I went to, you open to your index and you see where you noted that presentation and you can find it. The other thing that they did that was interesting is that they don't worry about saving space in their notebook. They don't worry about how many pages to retain for a particular topic. You just skip ahead. So you start your notes on one page, you open to the next clean page, you keep writing your notes, and you just note what page you skip to. And you can also make a note at the bottom of the page number itself. So you're following your notes from a meeting, you realize that you skipped a couple pages, this lets you go immediately to that next section. Then there's also Evernote, which many people are probably familiar with, which is a multi-platform app that you can use tags in order to then be able to search for things that are interesting to you. DevonThink is a Mac program which uses artificial intelligence rather than a tagging structure in order to find things that are similar within all the things that you've saved.
So once you've prepared and you've started to kind of build these connections in terms of depth and breadth, what's often neglected is the importance of the incubation stage. So the incubation stage really allows your brain the chance to build those connections and to build those new ideas. One thing that we came upon that might be helpful for incubation, and I've actually started to try and do this a little bit in my own life, at work life anyways, is a shutdown ritual. So much like a computer shuts down and has like a process by which it shuts down, our bodies and our brains sometimes need that same kind of process to signify that we're moving on from one thing to the next thing. And so you might do something at the end of your day that kind of is in a kind of routine or habit that allows your body and brain to know that now I'm shifting from my work day to my whatever else happens in your day. It can, closing your computer, putting things away in a certain way, that kind of thing, some kind of habit around that. And of course, there's other things like sleep, which most of us don't get enough of, but we should get probably more of. Meditation, and meditation doesn't imply that there needs to be some long stretch of time when you're meditating, but something that allows your brain to kind of slow down a little bit and take a rest. And then of course, exercise, because exercise is good for the body, but exercise is also good for the mind. So allowing that time for the brain to start to bring things together in a way that we're not even aware of.
So stage 3, illumination. So this is often something you can't control, right? Like Mendeleev didn't go to bed that night and say, I want to dream about the periodic table. Like it often just happens. And some of the best ideas that just happen. But we did run into some kind of options for when you sort of have a grant due and you need to kind of nudge the process along that we thought we would share. One of them is, so who's had a good idea in the shower? Yeah, like it's a super common place to like have your brain come up with something unexpected. And the reason people think this is that you're sort of partially occupied. The fact that you're washing your hair means that part of your brain is distracted. And that allows sort of a different level of cognitive processing to be happening in the background. You can do similar things if you think about the stories of all the people that have come up with great ideas on walks, particularly walks in nature. It turns out that the visual stimuli in a safe place and just the act of physically moving can both be really helpful to spurring new ideas.
And for me, with the active processes, because I sometimes like an active process. So this idea of kitchen sink thinking. So what kitchen sink thinking is you think of a problem that's you're trying to solve, or a problem that needs to be solved. And it's maybe have had you stumped for a while. Then with that challenge in mind, you read other things. So you actively read other things or shallow dive into other things that might be related to that problem. So you're kind of layering onto that, like things, other little pockets of information. And they can be related or they can be totally unrelated. Then what you do is you actively relax. So you might take one of these breaks that Kate's talking about, or you might kind of take a walk, or you might do something that actively relax your brain. And periodically, you kind of think about the thing again, and you think about the components, and you shallow dive again, and then you drop it again, and you actively relax. So kind of like adding, taking away. And it kind of allows that problem to percolate in a way, but it also allows your brain to rest and allows those combinations to be built. I try this. I'm not sure it's resulted in any kind of great idea yet, but it's something that's out there if you wanted to look more into it. The other thing is this idea of mind mapping, and here again is a strategy that I like, that I think that it's kind of an active strategy. Now, there's lots of different mind mapping programs out there or strategies to mind map. But why I like a mind map is that, in this case, it's a business plan, but it could be a problem that you're trying to solve. And then what you can do then is you can add to the mind map things that are related to that problem that would allow you to kind of think about ideas in that sphere or space. So for example, in here, administration, marketing, sales are all necessary components to the business plan. In my case, it would be other things that are related to, let's say, a clinical problem around children with disruptive behavior. But what kind of things might be relevant to solving that problem, and then what kinds of things are relevant to those things. And then you kind of start to think about, hey, something is missing. Hey, I need to add some more here. So it's a visual depiction of a problem and a solution in a way. And because I like visual things, that kind of speaks to me.
Can drawing be something similar to that?
100%, yeah, 100%.
I don't do mind mapping, but I do lots of drawing. Just trying to draw whatever's on my mind and solve it. And often something comes up just by drawing.
Absolutely. And I think that when I was looking into more mind maps and into how does a lot of people do that strategy too, because it's kind of like a free-flowing way of doing it in whatever connections. People have done these really interesting kind of almost like cartoons that are on the internet that, yeah. Anything, as a visual person, I think those things are really, really helpful. Absolutely.
And then stage 4 verification, where you take that new idea you've had and you evaluate whether it's good or not. We've all spent a lot of years in school and in training figuring out how to do this, so we're not going to talk about this as part of the talk today. But we do want you to take a second to kind of make groups. This is a hard room for that, but maybe talk to the person next to you, maybe turn around and have groups of 3 to 4. But talk a little bit about, do these ideas resonate? Does this process, do you see this creative process in your life? Do you see it, have you seen it in other people's lives? Do you have other techniques that you've used? We've given you a bit of a cheat sheet because we've covered so many different ideas. We know it's hard to keep all of them in your head, so we have a bit of an outline on the Thinking Like an Artist page to sort of give you a place to start. But we'll give you a couple minutes to talk among yourselves, and then we'll ask if there's anybody that wants to share with the big group. Okay, so enjoy.
The second part now is, we're gonna talk about some strategies, and hopefully some of these strategies resonate in terms of how to work like an accountant to kind of build up some of these practices. But rarely on people's pies are anything to do with the idea generation things that we talked about. So giving a chance for the incubation to happen, or a chance for the generation of ideas to happen. We're so kind of immersed in our world. And I think one of the things that we wanted to highlight in the pie activity was, things we talked about, but also the fact that we don't protect time to do these other really important things that are necessary for us to have our next great ideas. So you can think about that, I guess, as we go through this next section.
Yeah, so I think I found this when I ran into this, and probably many of you have seen this before, to be a helpful lens to sort of think about how I was spending my time on my pie. So this is something called the Eisenhower quadrant or Eisenhower matrix, and Dwight Eisenhower used this as a way to sort of figure out how to spend his time as president. And he basically said that there's an XY axis of things that are important and things that are urgent. And I think all of us can agree we would like to be spending all of our time in the important half of this matrix. But if we're really honest with ourselves, when we look at our pie, often we find we're responding to the urgent rather than to the important. And then the hard part for us as clinician scientists is that a lot of the stuff that we have that is in the important quadrant will eventually end up in urgent. That grant that's due in a year, if you wait 9 months, becomes pretty urgent, right? But all the stuff, as Brendan sort of alluded to, all the stuff that we talked about in Thinking Like an Artist, time is what's necessary to marinate. That time is what's going to differentiate between you having the next sequential idea and having a breakthrough. And so the question becomes, how do we shift stuff out of the urgent, non-important quadrant, and how do we make time for the stuff that's important but not urgent? So conceptually, it's not that hard. I mean, conceptually, you just put constraints around your non-urgent or your urgent, non-important stuff, and you build time, like actual time, into your schedule using some of the strategies that people have brought up already to sort of schedule time for the not important, or sorry, the important but not urgent. I'm going to do that all through the whole thing. The urgent, the important but not urgent stuff, like schedule stuff. And that's what we mean when we say working like an accountant. So we're going to go through a couple different aspects of working like an accountant in how to think about ways that different people have done this. We don't expect that, we hope that 1 or 2 of these ideas will resonate with you. We're going to cover a smorgasbord, as Brendan said. Not all of them are going to be right for you, but hopefully 1 or 2 will perk your interest. So the first one is figuring out how to schedule time for the not urgent. And this came up in the discussion. One of the ways to do that is to, think about carving out time in your schedule during your most productive time window, identifying what that window is, and making sure that you schedule everything that you have control over. Some clinical duties, some emergencies are going to come up, but everything that you have control over, all your meetings, all your, you're responding to emails, all of that stuff, schedule it outside that time window so that you really have figured out a way to protect some time every week, every day for the stuff that's not urgent but is important. So the other thing you have to do this is to constrain those administrative tasks. Those administrative tasks are the things that are important to other people that maybe aren't always important to you. And it's a hard balance to figure out how you balance that need to be responsive to the other people that are depending on you with your need to do the things that are important to you. So, these are probably things you've heard before, right? Learn to delegate. So I've always struggled with this because of the upfront costs of delegating tasks, right? And I ran into this 30-to-1 rule that I thought was actually a helpful conceptual way to think about the cost of delegating and then the potential benefit of delegating. So if you imagine that any small task that you're going to delegate to somebody else and teach them how to do it as well in the way that you would want to do it, over time is going to take 30 times the time it takes to do the task yourself. That's why we don't do it, right? It's going to take me 2.5 hours to teach my administrative assistant to schedule things the way that I want them to be scheduled. And which would take me 5 minutes to do, right? But the thing that we neglect is the compound interest. Once I've taught her how to do that, then she takes it off my plate forever. And assuming that she's with me for a substantial period of time, that 5 minutes a day that I'm no longer managing my own calendar adds up to a lot of minutes by the end of a year, 2 years, 5 years. So when you're thinking about what to delegate, think about how long the task is, how, the amount of time it's going to take you to teach somebody else how to do it, and then what the payoff is going to be, depending on how long that person will work with you and be able to take that task off your plate. Yeah.
Say one more time, 30-to-1?
So 30-to-1. So it's a 5-minute task. It's going to take me 30 times 5 minutes to teach somebody else to do it. Because it's going to be a spaced process, right? That I'm going to tell her, explain the process, take me 15 minutes to explain conceptually what I mean. And then she's going to do it, and I'm not going to like what she does. I'm going to have to go back and explain it again or tweak my explanations. And eventually we will get to where that person does it the way that I would do it if I were doing it. But it's a huge investment of time to get there.
So that's not a rule to say, well, you delegate this and you still do this yourself. It's a rule how long it takes to delegate.
Well, so it's a rule to say that that delegation itself is an investment. And so you want to think about how much time of your time is that task taking. If it's a 5-minute task you're doing once a month, the amount of time for you to delegate to that somebody else probably isn't actually worth it. Does that make sense? But if it's a 5-minute task you're doing every day, or if it's a task that's taking 3 hours of your week, then perhaps even if it's taking a long time, the process of delegating would be very difficult. The more time of yours it's taking up, the more valuable it is to delegate, assuming that person's going to be with you. So if you have a summer student, it may not be worth it. So it's the 2 parts. So that helps. Okay. So next is check email intentionally. This has come up as well. Like the fastest way to get sucked into somebody else's urgency is to open your inbox. So if you have a productive time window and you need to do some work, don't open your inbox. They will find you if they need you that badly. So be thoughtful about when you check your email. Turn off notifications so your email doesn't interrupt you, and be in control. Like, instead of letting your inbox control you, control when you interact with your inbox. And then finally, having a way to collect your administrative tasks so that you know and you're confident that you're actually addressing the ones that you need to address in a timely manner, right? Because often we respond to things that are urgent because they have to be done today. But if you have a running list of things you need to do over time, then you can block off Wednesday afternoons for your administrative tasks, and you already know all the administrative things that you need to do. So there's lots of different systems for doing this. Richard and Eric Benchimol wrote a fantastic article. We'll have Linda circulate it about being an academic athlete, and it has lots of different great strategies. But I did want to go through two different strategies that people have used in the productivity literature that I think are worth sort of on a high level talking about. The first is getting things done. So this is from a great book. It's worth a 2-hour read. A plane ride is a perfect time to go through the whole system, but it's fairly complicated. But there are 3 things from the Getting Things Done system that I think are easy to understand and helpful. The first one is this idea that whenever you have something that you're trying to remember to do that's in your head, it takes up a lot of brain space because it's an open loop. And so you're constantly having to remind yourself, don't forget to stop on my way home and get milk. You know, and you'll have to, over the course of the day, you'll have to remind yourself that 7 times. So he says the best way to not have that problem, not have that mental energy going to that wasted space, is to not keep anything in your head. Have some way that you write everything down, some system where you externalize all of those things on your to-do list, and then you don't wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't, because it's on your to-do list. The second, and this happens all the time to me in an inbox, is getting sidetracked, where you open up your inbox intending to do one thing, and instead you find something else and you do that instead. And then you get to the end of it and you're like, oh my gosh, I never did the thing I wanted to do. So he has a rule of thumb that's helpful for this. He says that when you open up your inbox and you're processing emails, process emails. Like, go through all the emails. Anything that you can do in 2 minutes or less, and this applies outside of emails too, but anything you can do in 2 minutes or less, do it, because it takes you more time to remember to do it later than it takes to do it. If it takes you longer than 2 minutes though, don't do it immediately. Put it on your list so that you make sure you're tackling it in the order of in your priority order, rather than it just being the next task that pops up. And then the third, how many of you just get exhausted reading your to-do list? I know I do. Like, you're just like, oh my God, I've got so much to do. So he says that one of the reasons for this is that we have a tendency to put projects on our to-do list. So we put things like plan birthday party on the to-do list. And when you get to that, you're just like, oh my God, I have so much to do to plan that birthday party. And you get overwhelmed and you don't know what to do. And then it just makes you like want to throw your whole to-do list away. So he says, don't do that. Keep a separate list where you have all the projects that you need to do. That a project would be defined as anything that takes more than one step goes on a project list. And then use that to generate your to-do list. And your to-do list only has things that are single tasks. So ask birthday boy who he wants to invite to party would go on the to-do list. Plan birthday party goes on your master project list. The one trick on this is then you have 2 lists, and you do have to look at your master list, project list, in order to generate your to-do list. But it does make your to-do list a lot less stressful. So then there's inbox zero. Who's heard of inbox zero? Yeah, and who has kind of a sinking feeling in the pit of their stomach about it? Yeah. So the way I used to manage my inbox was that I would read an email, and if it was something I had to do later, I would mark it as unread. And every time I'd open up my inbox, I would start at the top, and I would look at all the unread emails, and I would have this sense of like existential dread that there was an email that was unread that was on page 6, and I was just never going to get to it. So inbox zero doesn't fix email problems at all, but it fixes that sense of existential dread that there is some email that I should have responded to 6 weeks ago that's buried in my inbox that I'm never going to find again. So conceptually, the big idea of inbox zero is when you get a new email, you process it. You do one of 4 things. You delete it if you don't need it. That's easy. If it's important and it's urgent, so you need to respond today or tomorrow, it stays in your inbox. You do nothing different than you would normally. If it needs a response sometime, but not today or tomorrow, you have a folder that's your to-do folder. That to-do folder is the equivalent of marking it as unread before. It's the equivalent of like telling yourself it's an open loop I need to address. And if it's something that you either can respond to in 2 minutes and you respond, or something that you just need to be able to access later, it goes into another set of folders in order for you to be able to find it when you need it. Okay? So how do you get to inbox zero? Because the only way that inbox zero works is if your inbox is essentially only contains things that are urgent and new and important. So this is the hardest part of inbox zero, is recognizing that there are emails in your inbox that you're never going to read. There are emails that you got 6 months ago and you're never going to get there. So what you do is you break your inbox into two parts, your current inbox into two parts, and you say emails that are less than 3 months old, 6 months old, whatever your personal time window is, are ones I'm actually going to look at. The ones that are older than 6 months old, I'm just going to put them in a folder. I'm going to archive them. I'm going to find them if I need them with searching, which is what I was going to do in my inbox anyway. And then you focus only on this temporary folder that has the emails that are less than 3 months. And you organize them by sender, because if you organize by sender, you will quickly be able to delete a bunch of them, and then you process those. So then the processing, this is the other place that people often get mixed up, because you think about wanting to make this complicated system of folders so that you can find things. Don't do that. All you want to do is file it in the simplest structure you can, so that instead of searching 100% of your emails in your inbox, you're searching 20%. So make big discrete categories: clinical, research, teaching, students, whatever your categories would be. But do the minimum number of folders that you need. You can always go back and make it more complex. But the key to this is you want it to have no decision fatigue associated with processing your email. You want to look at an email and know immediately what folder to put it into, and that's what will help you stay on track. Obviously, your inbox is going to be 100 messages again in 2 days, right? But if you've done this process and you cleared out your inbox once, you just clean it again, and you then have your folder of things you know you need to do. You have all your other folders that you're going to find stuff by searching, and you don't have that sense that there's an email hiding somewhere buried in your inbox that you're never going to see. So, okay, so now we're going to talk about how to get started. So you've carved out your productive time window, and you're ready to go. What do you do? Who ends up opening their email because they just don't want to face writing that paper or opening that grant, right? So how do you keep yourself from opening that email? So there's two different methods in the literature that we thought were worth highlighting. One is called the Ivy Lee method. I'll let you Google it if you want to hear who Ivy Lee is. It doesn't really matter. But the idea of the Ivy Lee method is that every day you come up with 6 tasks that you want to get done, the 6 most important things, and you circle the very most important of those 6 tasks. And when you come in the morning, you do not do anything before you do that most important task on that list. That's the first thing that you do when you walk into your office. And then that way you know that even if the rest of your day goes bananas, you've done the most important thing on your to-do list already. And so you're good to go. And you will be productive. If you consistently do one important thing every day, then you will be productive. The other one is called Eating the Frog. So it comes from it's a great title, right? It comes from a Mark Twain quote where he says, "Eat a live frog first thing in the morning, and nothing worse will happen to you for the rest of the day." So if you're the kind of person that has some task that repeats in your life that you hate, and it just weighs on you all day long, the idea of this is that that's the task you do first thing in the morning. Because if you come in and you do that task, you feel such this lift of weight off of your shoulders that the rest of your day is better because you've eaten your frog, okay? So that's eating the frog. Then there's this idea, and this kind of came up circumferentially in our discussion, this idea of building a routine that leads you into being productive. So for this, we're going to talk a little bit about a habit loop. And some people may have seen this before. It's a great book, Power of Habit. Highly recommend it. But there's this idea that we have habit loops in our life. So almost everybody brushes their teeth every night, right? How do you know that it's time to brush your teeth? There's a cue. You think it's time for me to go to bed. And when that cue happens, I'm going to go to bed, you go and brush your teeth. And then you have the reward that your teeth don't have sweaters on them anymore, right? You have that nice minty, fresh feeling in your mouth. That's a habit loop. And it's a habit loop you worked on as a toddler over and over and over again with your parents to now the point where you don't even think about it. It's not, you don't have to have on your mental to-do list, brush teeth, right? So you can do this in your work life. So there's a couple different tips that you can use. One of them is that it's easier if you identify cues that you already have for routines that you already have. It's easier to replace the routine than it is to create a brand new habit loop. For example, one of my routines, and I'm guessing I'm not the only one, is to walk into my office first thing in the morning, turn on my computer, and check my email. So the act of walking into the office and logging into my computer is my cue. The routine is checking my email. I don't have to check my email when I open up my computer. What if I make a conscious effort to change that routine to something else? Whatever, it doesn't matter, I'm gonna meditate. You know, like whatever I do, like something, I make a conscious decision to change out that routine. And then I figure out what my reward is gonna be, how I'm gonna put a sticker on my star chart, whatever, but have some kind of my mental reward. So that's how you harness an existing habit loop. So another key to this though is to start really, really small. So say I want to build a meditation habit. I'm not going to meditate for 5 minutes. I'm going to come in, I'm going to use my computer to, logging into my computer as my cue. I'm going to take 2 deep mindful breaths. That's where I'm going to start. I'm going to make it so easy to do my new habit that I can't mess up, right? Set the bar really low. Then you can always build on that. That two mindful breaths, 6 weeks from now, I'm going to make it 10 breaths. Then it's going to be 2 minutes, then it's going to be 5 minutes, whatever routine I want to build, right? So you start really small, make it so you can't mess up. And then third, the other problem with habits is that it's very easy to fall out of habit. So I once made a bet with my brother that I was going to do the 7-minute exercise routine every day. Did it every day for a year. Turns out betting my brother is very, very motivating for me. And then I got to the end of the year and I was like, I did a year, I can stop. And I took a day off and then I took another day off. And then I stopped doing it altogether. I haven't done 7-minute workout since then. So like the problem is not taking a day off. The problem is not starting again the second day off. So life is going to interfere with your habits, right? It's going to interfere. Inevitably, you're going to mess up. So figure out what you're going to do to restart when you mess up and have that plan when you're starting your habit so that you won't miss 2 days in a row. Okay, couple tips. Sometimes it's really hard. You've opened up your computer, you're in a productive headspace. How do you make yourself actually do work? So Pomodoro technique is one that's often talked about that's really helpful. So 25-minute sprints. I'm only going to work for 25 minutes and then I'm going to take a break. You take 25 minutes, 5-minute break, and you break your work day into those chunks. Another is write 1 sentence. Tell yourself, I don't have to do anything other than open up the document and put 1 sentence on the paper. Make it so easy you can't fail. Often the act of writing 1 sentence will lead you into writing the second sentence. It's just getting started. Self-bribery. I wrote my Ph.D. thesis because every day I bought a $6 latte from Jimmy's. And if you've invested $6 in your morning coffee, you better be sure you're going to get some work done. And then when all else fails, productive procrastination. If you have something you just can't make yourself do, find something else to do in its place, but make sure it's actually productive. Like this is where it's very easy to get into your inbox and do something stupid. If you're gonna productively procrastinate, do it mindfully. Figure out what you can actually accomplish in place of whatever it is you don't want to do. And then this is hard. How do you stay motivated? So high intensity interval training, everybody's probably heard about that from an exercise standpoint, this idea of sprints. So make a meeting with somebody and tell them, I'm going to bring you my grant proposal in 6 weeks. Like give yourself a very short artificial deadline. Make yourself and make some kind of commitment to somebody else, and that will help you stay on track to get that done. Social pressure. So Kim Widger, and Nicola did a great talk for the Ontario group a couple of weeks ago, and Kim talked about faculty diversity, which is a program website that U of T runs, where there's actually, that U of T belongs to and a lot of different faculties belong to, where you can actually sign up for like a writing club and you invest some money in being a part of this writing club, and then you have accountability. You have to write every day, you have to check in, all this stuff. She said it was the best thing that she's ever done. She wrote 17 papers or something, I don't remember, something big. Make a bet, a bet with my brother. It's very effective to make a bet with somebody. So figure out some way to have a short-term goals and to figure out some way to create some social pressure around those. And then figure out what your metrics are going to be. How are you going to track those things? So it's very easy to track output measures, things like papers published, grants received, all those kinds of things. Those are easy. We track those on our CVs. Figure out how you can motivate yourself by tracking how many Pomodoro cycles you do, how many paragraphs you write. Like, figure out some little metric that you can use, because that will make you much more likely to stay motivated. So daily journal, this was in the academic athlete article. Have a daily journal, write down your goals for the day, and then did you achieve them? Kim talked about having a stages of publication chart. I thought this was awesome. A poster board in her office that had idea, development of idea, proposal, and it took all the way down to published paper. And then you have stickers, like a Post-it note with each of your project titles. And you physically move your Post-it note down from the start to the finish. Like, how satisfying is that? Every time you get to move it, like, it's like a huge dopamine hit. Create ways to give yourself dopamine hits. It's really effective. So there's the paper clip strategy, where you say, I'm going to do 6 Pomodoro cycles today. Put a pile of 6 paper clips on one side of my desk. Every time I do a cycle, I move it to the other side of the desk. Same thing, I think sticker charts and star charts are not just for toddlers. I find them incredibly motivating. Every hour I spend being productive, I'm going to give myself a gold star. Awesome. All right, that was a ton. Break up into small groups, talk about it, wrestle with these ideas. We can't wait to hear what else you have to suggest.
We have about 5 minutes, and what we want to do towards the end is really come to an action plan. So on the back of that pie chart activity is an action plan sheet. So what we want you to think about is kind of what are your takeaways from today, and how are you going to implement them into your workflow? So here's my action plan, and this is actually a real action plan. It's not a made-up action plan. So I really want to develop some habits that allow me to kind of protect some time for this idea generation. For me, eating the frog is extremely important. I'm the type of person that when there's something that's bugging me on my mind, everything else is affected. Like my day seems way worse because I have something on my mind that I could probably do really quickly, but I don't do it because it's something that bothers me. So my thing is eating the frog. So that could be, calling a client who's having some, difficulties with the system, like working with maybe a trainee who's having some problems, or sending an email that I'm dreading, whatever it is. Even if it's small, it could be medium-sized. So what I do now is, on arrival to my office in the morning, I pre-think about what's the thing that's bugging me. I do that thing once I get in. That's what I do. And so now I try and avoid these urgent messages. I try and kind of I don't open my email, I just kind of deal with, unless it's an email thing that I'm dealing with. And I don't do things that might interfere. So I eat the frog, and then I move on to my rest of the stuff. So I'm trying to build a habit around that. So if you guys could take a few minutes, think about what might be the goal that you want, what strategy might you use, and make it reasonable. Like, we want really what's possible. And then how might you implement that, and what might get in the way? So try and be realistic about that, because having an action plan might allow for you to kind of do something after this. Oops. So take a few minutes in that, and before you leave, if you can, also complete the satisfaction survey. Was it evaluation survey?